Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
As we get ever closer to a race war in this country, we need to step back and look at how we can solve this problem rather than continuing to point fingers at each other. Take a look at this story from the Washington Post. It's a good example of how two sides can misinterpret the data, okay? The Washington Post asks, aren't more white people than black people killed by the police? And they say yes, but no. And then they go on to point out the statistics. Since January 2015, 732 white people have been killed by police, 381 black people were killed by police. But then they go on to talk about how if you look at it as a percentage, you have 2.5 times more blacks killed than white. Why don't we look at it this way? Why don't we say, what can we do to stop 1,100 people from being killed unnecessarily by the police? And I'm not saying all these shootings were unnecessary, but we do have a lot of unnecessary shootings. How do we get control of that? We aren't going to get control of it if we try to continually point the blame at the other side, if we try to use this to promote a racialist agenda, which is what Obama and his cronies have been doing for the last 50 years. As I pointed out on Friday, going back to Bill Ayers and the SDS, the idea of white privilege, the idea that they could use a division between blacks and whites to create their socialist revolution. And I have to say that black people are being betrayed by the Black Lives Matter because they're focusing on the racial aspect of this. We need to stop the excessive use of force. And if you're a minority, why would you tell the majority that it's not their problem? And that's essentially what they're doing. They're saying this is simply a problem of the black community. Shut up, it's not your problem. They tell white people that if you have violence and retaliation, when the police react out of fear or maybe out of racism, I'm sure there's some racism there, there's a lot of fear. The shooting that was done by the individual in Dallas, that was clearly racist. Okay, so we need to understand where this is going, and we need to look at what we can do to pull this together. Meanwhile, we've got the solution that is being offered by Obama and the people who want a revolution in this country, saying we have to centralize control of our police force. Understand that the worst thing we can do in this country is to continually centralize power in Washington. You should understand that in multiple ways by now. But if you try to centralize this kind of power, that is the worst kind of centralization. You have the Dallas police chief saying we're asking cops to do too much. No, the reality is we're asking government to do too much. This is what he had to say. This is Dallas Police Chief David Brown at a press conference today saying, every societal failure, we put it off on the cops to solve, whether it is mental health or drug addiction or loose dogs or failing schools. We expect the cops to solve the problem. No, you see, what they're doing is the cops are actually the vehicle of government. They're where the rubber meets the road. But we have to ask, who is driving these problems and offering us a solution where government is always a solution? I mean, when we look at the situation like drug addiction, as we pointed out many times, it should not be a law enforcement issue. We should not have to have cops in the schools. They weren't in the schools when I was in school. We don't have to have the police involved here. We don't have to have force as a solution to every problem, government force. But that's what they continue to offer us. But then he goes on with this non sequitur. Even when he says policing was never meant to solve all these problems, then later on he says, be part of the solution. Become a police officer. We're hiring. Get off the protest line and put in an application. We'll help you to resolve some of the problems you're protesting about. No, he continues to sell the idea that the government then can solve all these problems. So we're back where we started from. But one of the most troubling things to me that has come out of this is the use of a militarized robot for the first time. And of course, we see the article that was linked on a Drudge Report from Defense One saying military robotics makers see a future for the armed police robots, okay? And they see absolutely no problem with it, although we have people who are ethicists who do see a problem with this. If we go back and we look at the initial reports of this, The Verge talked to someone who had seen robots used this way in Iraq as part of a war. And we have to understand, this is not about proposing that we're going to militarize the police. The police have been militarized for a very long time, fighting a war on drugs, as I mentioned before. It's an addiction problem. It is not a use of force problem. But they have created a war on drugs, which is a war against our people in this country, specifically against the black people, targeting them more than any other community. bringing drugs into their country, just as we've seen with the crack cocaine epidemic. It was a CIA move to put crack cocaine epidemic into the black communities, and then they ramp up the war on drugs. Why? Because it is really about making money for the military-industrial complex. It's about accruing even more power to the government because we continually ask them to solve the problems. Earlier today, the Drudge Report had this picture up about the militarized robot, and Matt Drudge tweeted out, he said, "What race is a police robot killer?" And I tweeted back and I said, well, it's an arms race is what it is. It's really like Ed 209. Remember the Ed 209 robot from RoboCop?
Please put down your weapon. You have 20 seconds to comply. You now have 15 seconds to comply. You are in direct violation of Penal Code 113, Section 9. You now have 5 seconds to comply. 4, 3, 2.
Now what you saw there with Ed 209 was an autonomous killer robot. And what we had happen in Dallas was a robot under the control of the police. And they decided that they would not subdue the subject with gas, but that they would kill him with a bomb. But understand that the days of autonomous killer robots are coming very quickly. Earlier in the week, we had a story on Drudge Report about how killer robots are being programmed to hunt down prey as a group. Okay, there's a story right there, and they say one day this could be a very important skill for robots across the world. Because you understand, when we have these DARPA challenges with the robots, they tell us, well, we need to be able to have these robots go in dangerous places like Fukushima where they can shut it down. That's not what they're for. And they are not going to use robots to hunt down antelope. They're going to use them to hunt down people. Let's look at where this is really headed. We've got a story up on Infowars today from the Ron Paul Institute. In Dallas, the drone wars just came home. And they point out after hours of what police claimed were fruitless negotiations with Johnson, a weaponized robot was sent to where he was hiding and blown up, taking him along with it. And they have a tweet there from Peter Van Buren who said, "We have the first law enforcement use of drones, albeit with wheels and not wings, to kill someone without trial in America." And he goes on to say, police claim that continuing negotiations was pointless and attempting to capture him would have put officers at risk. Okay? Now, understand where this is going to go when we say that we're going to be able to use lethal force against people who are suspects. They point out in here the person who you saw the picture floating around social media for quite some time, the black man with a goatee that was in camo. His name was Mark Hughes, and they say he was wrongly identified by Dallas police as a suspect in the shooting. Police tweeted photos of him marching with protesters, openly carrying a rifle, as is permitted in Texas. Police claim he was involved in the shooting. He was a suspect, just like Johnson was a suspect. During questioning, they told Hughes that they had a video of him shooting people, which was a lie. What if police had sent the drone to take out Mark Hughes? What will happen in the future to a future Mark Hughes, who was falsely accused by police of being involved in the shooting? Will we come to accept murder without trial? And I would suggest to you that is a slippery slope. And I think that is one of the most disturbing things that has come out of this event. It's one of the reasons why we have to stop pushing this forward, fighting between each other as black and white, and understand where the real danger, where the real problem lies. We have to get control of the police. That control has to be local, not federal, not distant from us. We have to understand that. Now, on RT, they point out that the Dallas sniper shootings were put on the spotlight in open carry gun laws here in Texas. They say that both the mayor and the police chief mocked the idea that we have open carry here in Texas. This is what the police chief said. He said, "It doesn't make sense to us, but that's their right in Texas." That's Police Chief Brown. He said, "For our officers, they were suspects, and I support that belief." He said, "They are suspects until we eliminate that, or in the future, until they eliminate them." That's the true danger. That's where we're headed with this militarization of the police. Think about SWAT teams, how we now have about 80,000 SWAT raids a year in this country because of the war on drugs. But of course, it's going to get much worse. And in many of those cases, innocent people are injured or killed when they go to the wrong location. People like to call in SWAT raids as a joke or call it in on their enemies. And we've had similar situations where people call in and say, "I've got somebody here with a gun," and the police show up and start shooting immediately. like that young man in Ohio who was killed. As you can see, the police officer jumping out of the car, immediately shooting this young man who was simply playing with a BB gun. We have to understand what the real problem is, and we're not going to go down this road of a federalized, militarized police. We have to understand that and push back against that.
Thousands of years ago, there was a basic form of chivalry. Our ancestors would hear the drums of war, giving the warriors of the tribe a chance to organize and prepare a defense. 60 years ago, when foreign air forces were approaching filled with bombs, they had drums of their own, air raid sirens. But in the 21st century, there are silent weapons for quiet war. Pathogens added to the food and water, and to the lining of plastics that destroy our vitality, turn off our hormones, and accelerate our journey towards death. I personally counter this onslaught with Anthroplex. Anthroplex is designed with known organic concentrated herbs to create the basic foundation to normal metabolic activity inside the human body. Discover why Anthroplex is turning so many heads today. It's time for us to take our bodies back into our own hands, and it starts at InfoWarsLife.com with Anthroplex.